Welcome to the Lion's Share podcast, where we break down today's most impactful research and bring fresh insights from the academic frontier straight to you.
Today, we are walking straight into a minefield.
Oh, definitely.
Few topics in business generate as much genuine anger as CEO compensation.
Right. It usually just dissolves into a shouting match.
Exactly. It's either they're greedy fat cats looting the treasury, or, on the other side, it's the free market at work. Deal with it.
It creates a tremendous amount of heat, but usually very little light.
That's it, exactly. So today, our mission is to, ignore the headlines and look at the actual mechanics.
Get into the weeds.
We're analyzing a fascinating paper, CEO Compensation, Evidence from the Field, published in the Journal of Financial Economics in 2023. The authors are Alex Edmans, Tom Gosling, and Dirk Jenter. And honestly, this paper is a bit of a unicorn.
It really is. I mean, usually finance research involves downloading a massive spreadsheet of public data.
Right. What CEOs got paid over the last 20 years?
Yeah, and then running these complex regressions to sort of guess why the numbers are what they are. But that's like trying to understand a marriage just by looking at the joint bank account statements.
I love that analogy. You see the numbers, but you don't see the arguments or the fear or the compromises that led to those numbers.
You miss the whole story.
And that is the hook here. These researchers didn't just look at the spreadsheets. They went out and actually asked the people signing the checks.
They surveyed, over 200 non-executive directors and about 160 institutional investors in the UK. Plus, they did these deep dive interviews to get the why behind the what.
And the UK setting is actually perfect for this, isn't it?
It is. It's the perfect laboratory. It sits right in that Goldilocks zone.
Not as low as Europe, not as high as the US.
Exactly. It has higher pay than continental Europe, but it hasn't reached those stratospheric, almost rock star levels of pay you see in the US. So what we find here tells us a lot about the psychology of governance globally.
So the goal is to crack open the black box of the boardroom. We want to know, do the economic models fought in MBA programs actually match the psychology of the people making these decisions?
Or are we just teaching fiction?
Right.
Well, the short answer is, we're teaching models that assume robots are running companies.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's nervous humans.
Okay, let's start with task one then, the core disconnect. If you had to summarize the central conflict this paper uncovers, what is it?
The headline finding, really, is that standard economic theory, the principal agent model, it just misses the human element entirely.
The textbook model.
Right. The textbook assumes a board designs a pay package to solve a math problem. How do we maximize shareholder value while getting the CEO to accept the job and work hard? It views the CEO as a calculator, input cash, output effort.
But the study found that directors, the people actually setting the pay, are driven by something else.
Fairness and reputation.
Yeah.
They aren't just optimizing for profit. They are terrified of the labor market.
Terrified.
And this creates a massive split in the data. It's a classic Rashomon effect. Directors and investors are looking at the exact same transaction, but seeing two different realities.
So
Directors are convinced that if they cut pay by even a little bit, the CEO will walk and the company will just collapse. Investors, on the other hand, they think the boards are weak and that the CEOs aren't going anywhere.
that is a huge gap in reality. Okay, before we dig into why that gap exists, let's look at this through a practitioner's lens. This is task 2. If you are listening to this and you work in management, HR, or even PR, why does this all matter?
Because the study shows that pay is primarily a communication tool.
Not just a financial tool.
No, it's about internal signaling. But here is the statistic that honestly shocked me, and it should shock anyone in accounting or management. 67% of directors admitted they would knowingly sacrifice shareholder value to avoid controversy.
Wait, I want to make sure I heard that right. 2/3 of directors would make a decision that they know hurts the company's bottom line just to avoid an argument.
Yes, they are explicitly trading off value for reputation. They're afraid of bad press, angry employees, or, and this is crucial, getting flagged by proxy advisors.
The firms that tell shareholders how to vote?
Right.
So the governance police, the proxy advisors, might actually be causing the very inefficiency they're supposed to prevent.
That's exactly the implication. Boards are so scared of stepping out of line with best practices that they just offer these cookie-cutter pay packages instead of what's actually best for their company. They are prioritizing safety over value.
So if you're a manager, the takeaway is that these best practice guidelines can actually become a straitjacket that hurts performance.
It's a critical takeaway. If you're managing by avoiding controversy, you might actually be mismanaging the firm.
Wow. Okay, to really understand this friction, we need to decode some of the academic language. This is our task 3, key terms. There are a few concepts we need to nail down.
Right. The first two are the constraints in the theory, IR and IC.
IR stands for individual rationality, also called the participation constraint.
I think of IR as the hook.
The hook.
Is the pay high enough to get the CEO to take the job and, stay? The study finds that directors view this as their #1 nightmare. They are obsessed with retention.
Okay, so that's IR, the hook. What's IC?
Incentive compatibility. Think of this as the carrot. Is the contract structured to actually make the CEO work hard?
And investors care more about this one.
Yes, investors view this as the priority. So right out of the gate, you have a conflict. Directors are trying to hire, investors are trying to motivate.
That leads to another term that surprised me in this context, intrinsic motivation.
Yeah, this is the internal desire to do a good job just for the sake of it. I call it the fire inside.
The fire inside.
Standard economics just assumes the CEO is a lazy agent who waits work and needs to be bribed. But the survey found that both directors and investors believe intrinsic motivation is actually the strongest driver of performance.
Which begs the question, if they're going to work hard anyway because they just love winning, why do we need to pay them $20 million?
We will get to that. It connects to the next term, ex post recognition.
Okay.
Usually we think of a bonus as an incentive. If you do X, you get Y. But the authors found that boards often use bonuses as a thank you after the fact.
So it's not a bribe to work harder next year. It's a gold star for what happened last year.
Exactly. It satisfies the CEO's sense of fairness, which is our final key term. It's based on reference points.
Yeah. So what they compare themselves to.
Right. A CEO decides if their pay is fair by looking at peers, their own past pay, or the company's profits. If they fall below those benchmarks, keeping up with the Joneses, they feel insulted.
Okay, we have the vocabulary, the hook, the carrot, the fire inside, and the gold star. Let's move into the structured analysis of the paper itself. 6 questions. Question 1, what exactly is the research question, and why is it important to ask it this way?
So the core research question is, what are the objectives and constraints of CEO pay from the perspective of those who set it?
It seems simple.
It seems simple, but like we said, looking at public data only tells you the outcome.
Right. The spreadsheet shows the final number, but it doesn't show the negotiation that got you there.
Correct. You can't see fear of the media in a regression analysis. You can't see risk aversion in an annual report. By asking the decision makers directly, the authors are trying to uncover the intent.
They're checking if the theories we teach in doctoral programs actually hold water in the real world.
And that's critical. CEO pay affects everything. How companies are run, how wealth is distributed, and, frankly, how the public views capitalism.
Which leads us to question 2. What theories are they actually testing here? We mentioned the standard shareholder value view, but they contrast it with this fairness view.
They rely heavily on the work of economists Ikerloff and Yellen on the idea of a gift exchange.
Gift exchange?
The idea is that an employment contract isn't just a transaction, it's a relationship. If a CEO feels paid unfairly, below those reference points we talked about, they lose motivation. Not because they can't pay their bills, but because they feel undervalued.
It's psychological. But surely at this level, business is about money, not feelings.
You'd think so. But the survey shows that directors refuse to cut pay for poor performance because it would be seen as unfair and would demoralize the CEO.
So a pure shareholder value robot would say, you failed, you get 0.
Right. But a human director says, if I give you 0, you'll be humiliated and you'll probably quit. The authors are testing if the rent extraction view, the idea that boards are just cronies filling the CEO's pockets, explains this, but they find fairness is actually the dominant explanation.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate. This brings us to question 3 about validity. If you walk up to a director and ask, do you overpay your boss because you're scared? They aren't going to say yes. How do we know they're telling the truth?
That's the classic social desirability bias. Everyone wants to look like a good fiduciary. The authors handled this with strict anonymity, but the real proof, the thing that gives this study its internal validity, is in the emissions against self-interest.
You mentioned a stat about pay cuts earlier that blew my mind.
This was the smoking gun. 41% of directors admitted that when they were forced to cut pay, Maybe because of COVID or shareholder pressure, there were no adverse consequences.
That is huge. They're admitting we were terrified to cut pay, but when we finally did, nothing bad happened.
Exactly. If they were just trying to defend their past decisions, they would never admit that. They'd say, oh, it was a disaster, we lost our best talent. The fact that they admitted they were wrong suggests the data is honest.
So this addresses the construct validity. We're actually measuring what we think we're measuring.
Yes, because the responses show real introspection, not just defensive posturing.
Okay, let's look at the numbers. Question 4. What econometric methods are employed? They didn't just ask yes or no questions.
No, and since this is a survey paper, econometrics here refers to the statistical analysis of the response data. They use rankings and Likert scales to measure intensity. But the real analytical power came from the subsample analysis.
Where they split the groups.
Exactly. They separated the director's answers from the investor's answers and compared them statistically to find these significant differences.
Can you give us an example of how deep that divide really is?
Take the threat of firing. Standard theory says the fear of being fired is a huge motivator. Investors rated its importance at negative 0.20 on a scale of -2 to +2. So, somewhat neutral.
And the
Directors rated it at negative 0.8.
Minus 0.88. That's basically saying this is irrelevant.
It's completely irrelevant to them. Directors essentially believe their CEOs are bulletproof. They don't think the threat of firing motivates them at all.
So the boardroom is a much cozier place than the investors think.
Much cozier. And this method of contrasting the two groups shows that CEO pay isn't one thing. It's a negotiation between two groups with totally different worldviews.
Okay, let's break down the key findings. This is question 5. What are the major results? We've touched on constraints and the reputation trade-off. What about motivation?
This is a major result. Financial incentives are secondary. As we touched on, intrinsic motivation and reputation are the primary drivers. The authors found that CEOs are driven by the desire to be seen as successful, not just by the cash to buy a new boat.
So that answers the research question by showing that incentive compatibility, the carrot, isn't the constraint that matters most.
Exactly.
But then there's the pay cut disconnect. This feels like the most practical finding for anyone wondering why pay just never seems to go down.
This is where the rubber meets the road. They presented a scenario. If you cut a new CEO's pay by 1/3, what happens? Directors predict the apocalypse. 59% say they get a worse CEO. 46% say the CEO would be demotivated.
And the investors.
They shrug. 33% say no adverse consequences. In fact, 77% of investors think pay is already too high anyway.
So boards are bidding against a market rate that the market itself doesn't even believe is real.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Let's talk about the structure of pay. Long-term versus short-term. Everybody says they want long-term thinking, right?
In public, yes. But in the survey, investors overwhelmingly want long-term incentives. 78% say it improves decisions.
In directors.
They disagree. Only 21% think making incentives longer would help.
Why? That seems totally counterintuitive.
Directors think the incentives are already long enough. They argue that if you push the reward too far into the future, say 10 years out, the CEO just discounts it to 0.
It loses its motivational power.
Right. They basically say if the carrot is too far away, the horse stops walking.
Finally, let's hit on pay for luck. This is the one that always angers the public. If oil prices go up, the CEO of an oil company gets a massive bonus, even if they did nothing. Why don't boards filter that out?
Economists have been begging for relative performance evaluation, or RPE, for decades. Just strip out the market luck. But directors hate it.
Why?
They say if shareholders win, the CEO should win.
So what's that fairness concept again? It's about sharing the spoils.
Yes. They also say benchmarking is just too hard. Who is the perfect peer for a company like Amazon or Tesla? If you get the peer group wrong, you destroy the CEO's trust. So they just default to the simple logic. Stock went up, here's your check.
Simplicity and fairness over economic precision. That's the trade-off they make. This brings us to the finish line. Question 6. What conclusions do the authors make, and are they warranted? Are we throwing out the textbooks?
We aren't burning them, but we're definitely rewriting the chapters on human behavior. The standard model of a rational board maximizing value is just insufficient.
So what do we need instead?
The authors conclude we need a model that incorporates two things: fairness and perceived constraints.
Meaning, we have to accept that CEOs view pay as a scorecard, a measure of their worth as a human being.
Exactly. It's status. If you pay a CEO $10 million when their rival gets $12 million, they aren't angry about the $2 million. They're angry about the disrespect. The conclusion is warranted because the data supports this fairness view much more strongly than the rent extraction view.
So boards aren't trying to loot the company.
No, they're trying to keep the peace.
And what about the uninformed problem?
This is the author's final, slightly biting conclusion. There's a massive information gap. Either investors are uninformed about how hard it really is to hire top talent, or boards are uninformed about how much power they actually have.
And considering that 41% of directors admitted nothing bad happened when they did cut pay.
It strongly suggests the boards are the ones who are uninformed. They are overestimating the CEO's leverage.
They're bidding against themselves.
They're bidding against themselves because they're scared of a ghost. The ghost of a market rate that might not be as rigid as they think.
It really humanizes the whole process. We think of the C-suite as a place of cold, hard calculus.
But it turns out it's driven by pride, fear of controversy, and, keeping up with the Joneses.
They aren't just consumption machines.
Absolutely not. They are people, and they are insecure about their status just like everyone else.
So wrapping this all up, how does this connect to the broader literature?
It connects directly to the behavioral economics revolution. It pushes us away from Homo economicus toward a more psychological view of labor markets. I think future research really needs to figure out how to model fairness mathematically. What are the specific reference points? Is it the previous CEO, the rival, the average employee? We don't know yet.
I want to leave our listeners with a final provocation.
Okay.
Both directors and investors claim that intrinsic motivation is the #1 driver of performance. They all agree the CEO wants to do a good job, regardless of the bonus.
Right. They all agree on that.
If that is true, why are we spending hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of hours of consultant time designing these incredibly complex financial incentive packages?
That is the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it?
Are we over-engineering pay for people who don't actually need the bribe? Or is the bribe not about the money at all, but just a very, very expensive way of keeping score?
The evidence from this paper suggests it's the latter. We are building these expensive scoreboards because we don't know how else to say good job.
A fascinating look at the psychology of the boardroom. Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into the Lion's Share podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share it with a friend and join us next time for more ideas worth talking about. We'll see you next time.